the remote valleys of Appalachia, where the mountains swallow the light and silence lingers longer than it should. There are stories, even the bravest refuse to speak aloud. One of those stories tells of a kingdom that was never marked on a map, a kingdom that thrived not on crops or trade, but on flesh and fear. They called themselves rulers, but their throne was built of bones, and their crown dripped with blood. Locals whisper that this family, the Kamores, ruled an entire stretch of the mountains as if it were their cursed dominion. Unlike other cannibal clans who hid in caves or rotted in backwoods shacks, the Kamores were something different, something more sinister. They didn't just survive off those who wandered too close. They organized, they enforced, they controlled. They created a kingdom, a nightmare monarchy, where every outsider was nothing more than a potential feast, and every local family lived in quiet terror of their wrath. The first reports come from settlers in the mid-1800s. Men and women who braved the mountain passes wrote of entire homesteads mysteriously vanishing, livestock left untouched, doors splintered open. It wasn't wolves, and it wasn't bandits. Survivors described seeing strange symbols carved into trees, spiral-like markings that grew more complex the deeper one traveled into Kamore territory, and those who crossed those boundaries without permission never returned. One hunter, Silas Grant, lived to tell the tale. He claimed he followed a deer deep into the hollow when he saw what he first thought was an old fort, but as he drew closer, he realized the walls weren't stone at all. They were built from bones, layered and fused together, human skulls embedded in the structure like grotesque decorations. At the center sat a massive wooden chair, a throne of sorts, stained dark with what could only have been blood. Grant swore he saw figures moving in the shadows, their faces disfigured, their eyes glinting like animals. He ran, leaving his kill behind, and told everyone in town he would never step foot near the Kamore Hollow again. This wasn't just a clan. This was a system, a kingdom of horror. The Kamores were said to demand offerings from nearby settlers, not of grain or coin, but of flesh. Those who refused saw their homes burned, their families dragged into the woods. The few who managed to escape their reach spoke of tithes, rituals where prisoners were offered to their so-called king, butchered in front of the clan, and divided like livestock. And here's the most disturbing part. They weren't just eating to survive. No, this was about power. Their reign was drenched in superstition. Locals whispered that the Kamores believed every victim's flesh carried strength, that by consuming outsiders, they absorbed their spirits, their skills, even their memories. In a world of starvation and superstition, this belief made the Kamores untouchable. People began to say they couldn't die like normal men, that their blood was cursed with immortality. Even lawmen avoided their hollow. County sheriffs admitted, in hushed tones, that sending deputies into Kamore territory was like signing a death warrant. A few bold posses tried, but none returned. The legend says the Kamores would hang their remains from trees as a warning, rib cages swinging like lanterns, skulls placed on spikes along the borders of their land. Still, what unsettled people most wasn't the violence, it was the order. This wasn't chaos. This was calculated. The Kamores had a hierarchy, a ruling line, and most chilling of all, they crowned themselves in ritual. Every generation, a new blood king was chosen, seated on the throne of bones, while the clan feasted in celebration. The crown itself was said to be woven from human hair, bound together with sinew, glistening red from centuries of blood anointings. Travelers reported seeing firelight deep in the woods, hearing drums that didn't belong to any church, and screams carried on the wind long after midnight. Some said they saw figures in ceremonial masks, carved from skulls, marching in procession toward the throne. Others swore that the Kamores could smell blood from miles away, hunting the injured and dragging them back for sacrifice. And yet, for decades, no one stopped them. No militia, no law, no neighbors daring to rise up. Because in Appalachia, the mountains don't just keep people out, they keep secrets in. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because not only did the Kamores rule through fear and ritual, but there are reports that they struck deals with outsiders, with desperate settlers, even with corrupt lawmen. Stories of families who sacrificed one of their own to earn protection, men who offered strangers up to the Kamores in exchange for their own survival. In the cursed kingdom, no one was safe, not even those who believed they'd bought immunity, and to this day, there are strange ruins in that hollow. Bones that shouldn't still be there. Symbols burned into trees that haven't faded after 100 years, and locals who swear they hear the drums when the wind howls. Some claim the Kamore bloodline didn't die with the old kingdom, that descendants still linger, watching, waiting, keeping the rituals alive, because kingdoms don't end with the fall of a king. Sometimes, they go underground. Sometimes, they bide their time. And sometimes, they rise again. The Kamore kingdom was not some backwoods secret by this point. It was a nightmare carved into the very mountains. People knew. Families whispered warnings to their children. But still, the Kamores thrived, feeding on that fear, cementing themselves as rulers no one dared to confront. Survivors' accounts describe the horror of living under their rule. Every full moon, torches would blaze in the hollow. The air would echo with drums made from stretched skin, beaten with bone. This was the night of the tithe, when outsiders were dragged before the throne of bones and offered to the Blood King. Families forced to watch their loved ones dismembered before their eyes. Knowing resistance meant the same fate. One story, recorded in a crumbling county ledger, tells of a preacher named Amos Wright. He tried to rally his congregation to resist, claiming no man, no matter how cursed, could stand against the righteous. That Sunday, his church was burned to the ground. Inside, his congregation's screams rose above the flames. Wright himself was later found nailed to a tree at the border of Kamore land, his chest hollowed out, a crude crown of intestines placed upon his head, a mocking message to all who thought they could defy the Blood King. But it wasn't only brutality that made the Kamores terrifying, it was their order. Witnesses described the rituals, like ceremonies, processions of masked figures, each role carefully defined. Children raised from birth to participate, to learn the sacred chants, to carve the symbols into bark and bone. Outsiders saw chaos. The Kamores saw religion, hierarchy, legacy, and then there was the blood throne. Accounts claim that those seated upon it could command not just the family, but the land itself. Some swore the throne gave visions, whispers from the spirits of those consumed, guiding the Kamores in conquest. It sounds like superstition, until you read the testimonies of locals who said the Kamores knew things they shouldn't. Military patrol routes, hidden caches of supplies, secrets that should have been impossible to know, unless they really did believe they absorbed more than just flesh. The reign reached its most grotesque height in the late 1870s, when the Kamores began expanding. It wasn't enough to dominate their hollow. They sent hunting parties into neighboring valleys, dragging strangers into the kingdom. Witnesses said the torches could be seen from miles away as the hunters returned, dragging prisoners in chains. Entire villages vanished, their cabins left abandoned, doors swinging open in the mountain wind. One chilling discovery came from a logging crew. They stumbled upon a pit in the woods, covered by branches and leaves. Inside were dozens of skeletons, arranged in a spiral pattern, each skull cracked open as if their brains had been scooped out. At the center of the pit was a single crown, woven from sinew, still wet to the touch, despite the bodies being long dead. The loggers fled, abandoning their work, and the site was later covered up by county officials who wanted no part of it. But the Kamores' expansion also sowed the seeds of their downfall. When you grow too bold, too loud, people start to notice. Families who had once lived in silent submission began to whisper of revolt. But the Kamores had eyes everywhere. Every would-be rebel was discovered, dragged before the throne, and made an example of. One account tells of a man named Jebediah Rowe, who supposedly tried to poison the Blood King's feast. When the plot was discovered, the punishment was worse than death. They didn't kill him outright. Instead, they cut him open and hung him upside down from the throne itself, letting his blood drip onto the king's feet during the ritual. Witnesses claimed the Blood King drank from it, declaring that no rebellion could ever poison him. Even outsiders who dared investigate fell victim. A group of federal marshals once tried to storm the hollow, determined to put an end to the Cannibal Kingdom. Days later, locals found pieces of their uniforms nailed to trees. Their skulls, some said, were added to the walls of the throne. After that, no official force ever tried again. And yet, for all their strength, cracks began to appear. Paranoia spread within the kingdom. Rivalries between brothers, whispers of betrayal in the bloodline. Some said the spirits they claimed to consume began to turn on them, driving them mad. Witnesses described members of the family clawing at their own skin, screaming that voices were inside their heads. Others claimed to see Kamore children with unnatural deformities, double rows of teeth, blackened eyes, skin that blistered in moonlight. The family's obsession with consuming power was beginning to consume them, instead. But perhaps the most haunting rumor came from a traveler who survived their feast. He claimed he was spared, not out of mercy, but because they believed he carried a message. That night, he said, the Blood King leaned close and whispered, "The kingdom does not die. We are forever. When one throne burns, another rises." He fled, carrying that warning back to civilization. And though many dismissed him as insane, his words would echo decades later, when the Kamore kingdom finally fell. And yet, somehow, its shadow remained by the 1890s. The Kamore kingdom was as much a curse to itself as it was to those it terrorized. For decades, they ruled through blood and fear, but the whispers of rebellion grew louder, not from outsiders, but from within. The kingdom that had crowned itself with bone and sinew began to fracture, undone by paranoia, hunger, and greed. Stories tell of the Blood King's heirs turning against one another. Brothers who once stood side by side now plotted in secret, each believing the throne was rightfully theirs. Rituals grew more desperate, more grotesque. Victims were no longer just outsiders. Sometimes, clan members themselves were offered to the throne in a twisted attempt to appease whatever forces they believed fed their power. One of the most disturbing accounts came from a midwife who escaped after being forced to serve the clan. She claimed that the children of the Kamores were born wrong, infants with teeth already sprouting, babies whose eyes were black as coal, their cries like the shrieks of animals. Many of them, she said, were consumed by the clan within days of birth, sacrifices to strengthen the bloodline that had already become too corrupted to sustain itself. The kingdom's unraveling did not go unnoticed. Locals, emboldened by tales of infighting, began to conspire. A secret coalition of families from the nearby valleys plotted to strike when the Kamores were weakest. They waited for a night of ritual, when the clan would be drunk on blood and fire. Armed with torches, axes, and rifles, they descended into the hollow. What they found was worse than they imagined. The Kamores were in the middle of their feast, bodies strewn across the ground, the throne slick with fresh blood. Witnesses claimed the Blood King himself was mid-ritual, chanting in a language no one recognized. When the attack began, gunfire shattered the drums. Torches lit the bone walls, casting monstrous shadows across the clearing. But the Kamores did not fall easily. Even unarmed, they fought like beasts. Men described being clawed and bitten, women screaming as they were dragged toward the fire. Some swore the Blood King himself rose from the throne with bullets in his chest and kept coming. His mouth open, teeth glistening red. It took 3 men with axes to bring him down, hacking until his crown of hair and sinew finally rolled across the dirt. By dawn, The hollow was a graveyard. The throne of bones lay toppled. The fires burned to embers. The Kamores kingdom was no more, or so it seemed. Because not every body was accounted for, survivors whispered that some of the Kamores children were taken into the woods before the final assault. Others swore they saw cloaked figures fleeing into caves deeper in the mountains, carrying relics of the throne with them, and in the years that followed, strange disappearances continued. Travelers vanished. Hunters found symbols freshly carved into trees, the same spirals that once marked the kingdom's borders. One chilling discovery was made in 1923, when loggers uncovered a hidden chamber beneath a collapsed cabin in the hollow. Inside were bones arranged in careful patterns, alongside a throne-sized chair carved entirely from stone. The bones were fresh, too fresh for a family that was supposed to have been destroyed 3 decades earlier. And then there were the sightings. A trapper swore he saw figures watching him from the ridge, their eyes reflecting light like animals. A group of children claimed they heard drums in the valley one night, though no fire was seen. Even into the modern day, hikers vanish in the hollow, their campsites left untouched, their belongings undisturbed. Some believe the Kamores curse never ended, that the kingdom lives on, not as a physical throne, but as a bloodline scattered through the mountains. Families intermarried, identities hidden, rituals passed down in whispers. They don't call themselves kings anymore, but perhaps they don't need to. Because a kingdom of fear doesn't require a throne, only the belief that something unspeakable still lurks in the shadows. And if you ask the locals today about the Kamores, most will refuse to answer. A few will tell you that the kingdom of blood is gone. But every once in a while, you'll find someone who leans in close, lowers their voice, and says, "The throne never burned. It waits, and when it rises again, Appalachia will remember the kingdom of flesh." And that was the kingdom of the Kamores, a dynasty not remembered in books or maps, but carved into bones, into blood, into the silence of the Appalachian night. But what do you think? Was this just a brutal family legend that spiraled into myth? Or could the kingdom still exist in some form today? Let me know in the comments, because the most disturbing part of these stories isn't always what we find. It's what refuses to stay buried. And if you thought the Kamores were horrifying, wait until you hear about the next family, a tale of madness, hunger, and something far darker than cannibalism alone. Make sure you're subscribed, hit that bell, and join me next time, if you dare, because in Appalachia, kings may fall, but the night never dies.